Welcome to Insights in Sound, where we talk to the people behind the scenes, behind the technology, and behind the music. People you may not know, but you should. And please check out getitInWriting.net/shows for a full list of our podcast YouTube series.
My guest is Mark Rubel. He is the Director of Education at Blackbird Academy. Nice to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
And this is a beautiful, beautiful room we're in. We're going to talk about that in a minute, but I'd like to start with a little bit of background on my subjects. Musical background, obviously.
Background. Well, somewhat. I'm really from an interesting background in that my father was a scientist, my mother was a journalist. And my dad was a mathematician, my mother was an author and a journalist. And as I like to say, if you put science and technology together with portraiture, you get record making.
It's an interesting mix of left brain, right brain, which obviously, I've always been fascinated with the aspect of the creative process that we live in as studio people, because there is so much of a mixture of left and right brain. There is so much of a mixture of technical and creativity. And, we were talking earlier with some of your students, and that to me has always been interesting to see how, as people come into their own, so to speak, some of them go the more right-brained way, the more artistic, creative. Some of them go the more technical, the big pocket protector people, the brilliant people who come up with all of this wonderful gear we use,
In this room.
Yeah, and there is so much of a balance there in a way. And I'm always fascinated with how one got to where you are now.
Yeah. Well, I will say about my father that the kind of science that he did, which was theoretical mathematics, is very much like poetry or philosophy. It's actually not as left brain as one might think. It really involves a lot of creative leaps, and so in that way, I think it helps as a background for a way to do creative work in a technical field.
Well, and that's, of course, music being mathematical in so many ways anyway. But yeah, you're right. I was always fascinated with that, as you get deeper into mathematics. I mean, algebra, even geometry, trigonometry, it's very, very it's a set of rules, and they're very rigid. But when you start getting into statistics and even calculus to a certain extent, you're thinking outside the box a little bit. You're being creative with numbers and with dimensions, and really, especially dimensions. And that, I think, is fascinating.
Yeah, and I mean, if you take it far enough, you get to string theory, or you take it back far enough, you get to Pythagoras, which is where much music theory comes from. So
yeah.
So that's my background anyway. Neither of my parents were musicians, but I got very interested in all of that. I was just, as we generally were, and I know you were, the kind of kids who would, when people would leave the house, would take the appliances apart and then try to put them together and not have too many parts left over.
Of course, absolutely.
And I did a lot of tinkering and building motorcycles and that kind of thing when I was 12, and racing motorcycles.
Yeah, internal combustion engines, that's another facet that I think it's interesting that so many music people are into them, because again, they are ecosystems in themselves, and they have electrical, and they have physics, and they have all of these aspects mixed together to create the sum of its parts, which is greater than all of the little individual pieces.
Yeah, and
just
even
like
now,
music.
I think I realized that part of what I was doing, part of what attracted me to motorcycle racing and drag racing, was the sound. It's an amazing sound.
Yeah.
It's sort of adrenaline-provoking sound. And a certain amount of tuning and building is done by ear, and a certain amount of racing is done by ear. Right? You're listening for the limits. You're listening for the revs and all that.
And a flight or fright kind of reflex as
totally.
well.
Yeah, and it is all about being in a kind of a flow state and being in the moment, and making quick decisions and following up on them and correcting. And the same is true in a obviously radically different way, but in a different way in a recording studio that to a large extent we're going by some combination of training and instinct.
Well, the other thing that's interesting about it is that so many of these facets are interdependent on each other. You change one thing and it changes something else. The same way, you change a bass note, all of a sudden you've changed the whole tenor of the song. Things like that, just little facets of how these ecosystems fit together.
Yeah, I agree, and I think even that's part of my approach to record making, is a kind of a gestalt and of a sort of filmmaking idea that everything is composed of details, but it's the ability to zoom in and out. You have to get all the details right, but you have to make the overall effect as well.
Zooming in and out that's been my mantra for so long, and I think that, to me, I think that's what makes not just a good musician and artist, but especially if you're producing or arranging, there's such an aspect of really being able to examine the fine details and at the same time see this whole big picture.
Yeah, it's funny, something that I see with students or with people who haven't been mixing in particular, but recording, is that they find it easy to zoom in. Well, it's easier to zoom in and get really close and fixate on the attack of the bass drum or something like that, but it's really hard for them then to not just stay there with their nose 2 inches from the canvas, to actually then zoom out and see how is it working overall. So that's part of what I try to help with in the school, is the different ways of looking at things, both the 30,000-foot view to the 1-inch view.
Yeah, and that, you're right, it is, because you start getting really inured with all those details. And I think that's why, one of the tricks that I learned early on, and I'm sure you know this one as well, was, as we would be mixing something, especially if we're in our own like home studios or whatever, I'd walk out in the hallway. I don't want to sit in front of the speakers and really fixate on this mix. I want to hear what it sounds like way out there where I'm not necessarily paying attention.
Mm-hmm. I think it's even more important these days. I call it peripheral listening. So just the way we have a central vision, we have a peripheral vision.
Yeah.
You sort of like staring at a canvas too close or staring at anything for too long, you get a blind spot and you can't see it.
Yeah.
And if you're sitting between the speakers just focusing on one thing, your brain dismisses it and you really can't tell what you're doing. But if you just play it in the background, then you go in another room and you make a sandwich or you have a conversation, then the things that maybe need attention will jump out at you, like, oh, wait, that word is missing, or that snare drum is early, and that kind of thing.
Or it's something that I just didn't hear because I was too focused on this the immediacy of trying to get the mix,
Yeah.
So what was your first instrument?
Well, it's funny. It's possible that my first instrument was a tape recorder. So if you can call that an instrument, I think we do, if we follow Brian, but
Sure.
When 1966, when I was 8, my parents gave me a little tape recorder with a little battery-powered thing with 3-inch reels and a little tethered microphone and the switch in the microphone.
Cool.
And I was completely fascinated by that. And I realized now that I didn't get a record player until the next year. So I was making recordings before I was consuming them.
Ooh.
Right?
Uh-huh.
And I have found the box that has those recordings, but I haven't had the guts to listen to them. But it's probably just 8-year-old me raving and yelling and who knows what, and reciting poetry and making sound and laughing a lot because I would, it was a 2-speed machine. You could speed up, slow it down, play stuff backwards.
So you can do Mickey Mouse voices
absolutely.
And monster voices.
Yeah, it was super entertaining, and that was great. We had this thing called the Edmund Science Catalog, and my dad would buy just magnets and random things out of that, which is kind of what the studio is made of these days, right? Magnets and random things.
Yeah.
As I show the students this picture, my dad built me this play toy, which was a wooden crate that just had a car dashboard, a bunch of switches and noisemakers and hammers and meters and stuff on it, which is basically this thing. It was just the 8-year-old version of this thing, and and just like this thing, it could be a spaceship, it could be a nuclear power plant, or it could be a mixing console, and I think so. That was great. And then the following year, I got a record player and was immersed in that and loved all the music. We had a piano, so I would just play at it, but didn't really have the attention span for lessons. Took
Well, piano required discipline. You had to actually think about what you were doing, especially if you're talking about reading music, too.
Right,
Yeah.
which I wasn't. But I was able to do what I do now, which is sort of sit down and play at it. But as far as actually having the, I think, patience and attention span to deal with it, I didn't. But and the same thing with trumpet. So then when I was 12, I had a series of events that led me to think that the bass guitar was the greatest thing in the world.
You mean it's not?
It is. I was
okay.
right,
Thank
even
you.
at that age.
Thank you, yes.
Yeah,
I mean,
and it was just the way that it felt, and that I had seen one. I thought it was absolutely fantastically beautiful, and the song "Ramble On" by Led Zeppelin.
Yes.
Just the bass line in that
bass line.
song was just captivating, and I decided I wanted to be a bass player, and so we rented a bass from the local music store, axe in hand, and I took some guitar lessons from a guy who was one of the original guitar players in REO Speedwagon from Champaign, Illinois, where I was. We moved when I was 2, and you know, and as the joke goes, I think I had 3 lessons, and I was ready to go out and do it.
You knew all 3 chords.
Exactly.
What
I
more
knew
is
which
this?
end of the
Yeah.
bass to blow into, and that was pretty much all that was necessary. And I got brought in to play bass with a very good jazz band at a high school that I wasn't going to. And this is a story that I often tell, but they brought me in. I had no idea what I was doing. I still kind of don't. But I had no idea what I was doing, and I couldn't read music. They put a score in front of me, and they started playing, and I just started sort of thumping along, making vaguely bass-like noises. And everybody in the band thought I was amazing, and that I'd suddenly, you know, Ray Brown or Jaco Pastorius had come into their midst, because the bass player before me, who was probably much better, the electric bass player, didn't have an amp.
So they actually heard you.
So the fact that I could make any low noises at all meant that I was a virtuoso. And that's pretty much that sort of false sense of confidence has kept me going to the present day. And tomorrow morning I'm going to drive up to Illinois and play a show with the same band that I've been in for 42 years. And, you know, still sort of just kind of thrashing away at it.
Hopefully, if you guys keep at it.
We might be good. Another
Yeah.
42 years.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
we can hope. But it's unusual, you know, that bass players aren't converted guitar players.
If you really understand both instruments, they are so different, you know, and everybody thinks that, you know, if you're a bass player, you're just a guitar player playing fewer notes down lower, you know. But the idea of, as you say, certain songs, you know, for you it was Ramble On, you know, my influences were guys like Graham Maybe. And I really felt that there was something so different about the bass. And part of it was the fact that if you're really playing a great bass part, almost no one notices it right away.
Right.
And yet you are so much a part of the structure of the music.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think so. And it's a good role to be in, because you're, as you said earlier today, you're tying the band together in many ways. You can drive it, but you're driving it from behind. You
Yeah.
could pull back, you could push forward, you could fill in the spaces, you can fill in the rhythmic spaces and lay down the harmonic foundation on which everything is built. And because the band that I'm in is a 50s, 60s cover band, that has been a great education. And I realize now, from a record producer perspective, to be able to take that golden era of music apart and have to figure out the Jamerson bass lines, and to have to figure out how everything interconnects, and also how the harmonies were built and the structure of the songs, that really gets ingrained in your DNA in a way that you don't get otherwise. And that's been extremely helpful, I think, in having reasonable instincts in how to make a record.
Learning the bass part to Heat Wave was absolutely phenomenal for me, even though, you know, you think it's pretty simple, but it's such a mix of a walking bass line and yet a really driving bass line. And, you know, not that the two are mutually exclusive, but learning that and learning really the aggressive yet passive role that the bass can play in music in general, I think is just wonderful.
Yeah, it's remarkable. James Jamerson in particular, just that he could play so beautifully and melodically, and it was so supportive and tied everything together, and yet you could take it by itself and it's a complete work of art. You could just follow it along with it. It's amazing how he's able to just connect all of those things.
The other bass player from that era that I really loved was Jerry Jamat. You know, again, very a little bit different than Jamerson in that he was a little more funky, and he was a little more of the kind of like a stutter, play the note, stutter, play the note kind of thing, you know.
Yeah.
And I love that kind of, you know, the feel that just imparts to everything else, you know. You can really be so influential.
Again, I do think it's good basis for being a producer, because you learn what not to do, where to leave space, how to stay out of the way, when to let things happen, when to direct them, but to do it in a subtle way where you're not up front and you're not making your record. Because it's the same if we're producing or engineering. It's, in my opinion, it's not my record, it's the artist's record.
Absolutely. And in fact, that, for me as a producer, that was really the ethos right there, was do no harm. You know, really. And it's funny because we both know, I'm sure, many producers who really have a trademark sound of their own. You know, the Roy Thomas Bakers of the world. Jeff Lynne is another one. Mutt Lange, you know, fantastic producers. They definitely have their own sound. And, you know, you hear a Jeff Lynne track, you know it's Jeff Lynne. You know, even before the background vocals come in.
Instantly.
You know? But then there are producers who really, you almost marvel that they've done this album and that album, because it's, you know, Steve Lillywhite, for example.
Joe Ciccarelli.
Ciccarelli is another one. Guys like that, you really just, it's phenomenal to think that you can be that invisible and yet be really driving the project in that sense, you know?
Yeah, there's a lot of zen and sleight of hand in all of that, I think.
There is. There's a lot of psychology, of course, but it's not psychology in the sense of manipulation. I mean, it can be, but I think a lot of it is also we're coaxing something out of someone. And I think that, to me, is really the beauty of, you know, we were talking earlier about working with singer-songwriters, and I mentioned the idea of, you know, talking to the artist and saying, where does this song come from? Because by doing that, you're pulling something out of them. If you can pull yourself into a position with this artist where you really have this communication with them, where they understand that you are so tuned into their creation, I think that just opens up so many doors.
Yeah. You know, it's something else that I learned from my father, because in watching him struggle with coming to a solution of a math problem or something like that, and I would watch him sort of agonize, why can't I be writing, or why can't I be, you know, publishing this thing or putting it together? And I realized that the real work that he was doing was when he was sitting in a chair staring into space. And the actual writing was the memorialization, the writing down of the solution. And I think it's the same with art and music and record production, which is the actual knob twiddling and the doing. It seems like that would be what the process is, setting up microphones or moving knobs and so forth, those sort of things. But really, that's just the expression of the message that you've derived, or the image that you and the people you're working with have conjured, and that's just the sort of conjuring it into reality. Do you understand what I mean?
I absolutely do, and I think that's, well, you know, it's funny because we talk all the time these days about work-life balance, you know, and I've realized as I've gotten older that a lot of times when I think I'm not working, I'm really working, you know, because really your brain is absorbing, and then it's got to filter through, and it's got to, you know, and I think really understanding that, that's when you start to look at the 30,000-foot view, you know, when you're not thinking about it, when you're not diving into those details.
Yeah.
And I think that's really critical for especially working on other people's stuff, because I think that's what allows us to bring that different perspective.
Yeah, it's a subconscious process to a large extent, and they've done some studies where they put electrodes on people's heads while they're playing music together. It turns out that they actually synchronize brain waves.
Oh, no doubt.
And now it turns out that it's also the audience, if you have an orchestra and an audience. And so I think there really is something magical and unmeasurable going on under the hood. And to a certain extent, and that's even more complicated when it involves multiple people in a room, trying to sort of grok together.
Yeah.
And that's why that's what makes it such a fragile process. And that's why one of the things that we try to teach most in our school is not just knowledge or techniques, but attitude and comportment and behavior and psychology.
One of the things that I've always found fascinating, and I've had this conversation with a number of really great producers whom I admire, we're treading this very delicate balance because on the one hand, we have to get intimate enough with the artist and their music to really become a fifth Beatle, so to speak. On the other hand, we have to stay above that to a certain extent in order to direct the process, guide the process. And there's really this, you have to be such a chameleon to be able to know when to give how much and when to slack back, and all of these different aspects of it. And I think there's so much of a give and take there that really has almost nothing to do with the music. It's all in here.
Yeah, and the color that the chameleons forget is transparent, invisible.
Yeah.
There are times where we just have to get out of the way and let the process happen.
I love what you guys do here in particular, because there are schools that are studios, there are studios that have schools and whatnot, but there's a balance here that I really have not seen anywhere else in terms of really this porous membrane between the students and the artists and the recording studios and the classroom. And it's not just fascinating, I think it's wonderful, because this is the kind of thing that coming up, I would have given my left arm for this, really, because this is the kind of environment where you really have that opportunity to be both.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's unique in the world, and I think it's because we're in a unique place, and really we owe it all to John McBride, who's a unique person who I think really understands the nature of recording studio work, and I feel so lucky to get to be here and to work with the other teachers who are great, and to work with students who are great, and to work with the entire community, not really just the Nashville community, but the entire audio community. I mean, we're so lucky to have someone like yourself come in and talk with us and to give us perspective, and they get all these insights, and we talk to, I don't know how many people in the 6 months that we're here, but it's got, it's just tons of people of every stripe. And I would say it's a community effort, and what we're really trying to do is the people that come to us, we're trying to prepare them as well as we can and give them everything that we know. And we're also trying to shape the way that music continues to be made and will be made in the future, partly by connecting people with what's already happened, but also with new things like this room or Atmos and that kind of thing. I just, John and I like to say that really what we did is we built the school that we wish we could have gone to ourselves.
That is exactly my feeling just watching the process here. And I think, you mentioned John being very much understanding of, the recording process and everything. But I think the other aspect of that is there's an understanding here, not just on his part, but I think especially on yours and everybody else that I've met so far, of understanding how to impart that knowledge, and that is, it's not only a challenge to do, because obviously teaching there's so many variables there, but as the industry changes, as the way we make music changes, the way we consume music changes, there's a value there that I feel that we hang on to, of really wanting to be creating art. As I was saying to your students earlier, if you are not the person in front of that microphone, whatever the hell else you're doing, your number one job is to help that person get the best performance, create that bit of lightning in a bottle. And if you're not doing that, then that's when we're not meeting our true potential, I think. And there's an understanding there, I think, in this school, in this studio complex of we're here for the art.
We're in service to the muse, and we're very clear about that. And that is the basis of the word music.
Yeah,
right?
it is.
And the muse didn't start with Thomas Edison. It goes back as long as there are people. There's probably, humans aren't the only creatures that make music, but I'm certain that as long as there have been human beings, they've been singing and making sound and playing on things. I mean, the rhythm is part of life.
Sacred commodity.
So we hope that we're helping them to do more than just be good engineers, but to be artists and to be the best kind of people that they can. It's interesting because we spend the first day or two in the classroom talking about my vision of what education is and can be and may be elsewhere but isn't here. And one of the things that I think I forgot to say to this new class, but I have this concept of horizontal and vertical learning. Horizontal learning is kind of what you're talking about, which is there's always new stuff coming along. New techniques, new equipment, new ways of playing it back, new business models, and that sort of thing. And it's important to be on top of that and understand that. Okay. But it's also easy to focus on the shiny stuff and the stuff that's coming at you. The vertical learning is the deep stuff that doesn't change. This is, which is, what is art? How do you reach somebody? How do we convey emotion? How do we keep someone's attention? How do we express the almost inexpressible? And that's something that goes back, as I say, through history. And if we want to know how to make a great record, as I tell them, we should listen to all the great records that have been made, and we should. But we should also go to the art museum and look at the paintings. We should see the great films that have been made. We should explore all of human endeavor and find the stuff that is best and that survived. I mean, one of the things I tell them about mixing, and I'm not sure they really understand it, but I think if you want to be a great mixer, one of the best things you can study is mythology.
How so?
Because what we're dealing with is storytelling.
Sure.
And mythology is the sort of boiled down essence, the distilled essence of storytelling through the ages. It's where all the archetypes are.
Interesting.
Right? And it's all about a story from beginning to end, or an Aesop's fable, or a Tolkien book, or whatever. Right? It's all about starting one place, having a journey, ending up somewhere else. It's all about the different, sort of archetypal characters, of heroes and villains and heartbroken and tricksters and schemers, right? You have all these characters, and in some ways there's a limited number. And if you read Joseph Campbell, you find that
the characters recur.
They recur.
Yeah.
And so if you're and this is esoteric, but so but then when you sit down to mix a song, instead of going, okay, what compressor should I put on this that's going to make it a hit song or something like that, that's getting it backwards. That's the detail. Just pushing the faders up and down, hoping you're going to find something. It's worth spending time, and it doesn't have to be, I think I sound like you have to sit down and write an essay about it, but if you think about it for 5 minutes or an hour, or you take a walk and you think about the song, what is the story?
Yes.
Who is the character?
Storytelling.
Right?
Sure.
Shakespeare.
Yeah.
How do they appear?
Yeah.
What happens? And how does it resolve, or does it resolve? Right? Does it end happily ever after? Do they end up back home but a wiser person, the hero's journey? Is it Shakespeare and it ends up with a stage littered with corpses with swords sticking out of them? But to learn the best of storytelling, which is mythology, religion, Shakespeare, I mean, literature in general, which is, by the way, my college degree. I think if you have an understanding of how to tell a story, how to compel someone, how to portray them, what to leave out, how to light them, how to surround them, how do you make changes and transitions? Are they sudden? Are they gradual?
Sure, absolutely.
Right?
The art of cinematography.
Yeah. So I have a slightly bonkers idea, which I'm going to try on the students. I have the feeling it will fail miserably, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to try to teach mixing using a scene from a Kurosawa film.
Ooh, that's very esoteric.
It is.
Yeah.
But I think you could teach mixing with a scene from a Kurosawa film, and here's why. It has everything that you need to think about to make a mix effective. You have how
I
many
see where you're
characters do you
going.
have?
Yeah, yeah,
And what happens to them in the scene? I'll have to pick it fairly carefully.
yeah.
What's in the foreground? What's in the background? What's the motion? How
What's the
vivid are
cut?
things? What are the
Yeah,
transitions? How
yeah.
do you cut?
Sure.
What's the coloration? And so yes, that's esoteric. What are we doing in a mix? We have a foreground character, usually the singer. We have things in the background. Do we have one singer? Do we have two singers? Is there a power struggle? Right?
Well, and let's get even deeper than that. We spoke earlier about the idea of talking to the songwriter. What was it that brought this vision forward? Yes, in some cases it's going to be, ooh, baby, let's dance, But in a lot of cases it's going to be really telling a story. A songwriter is telling a story. The best songwriters tell wonderful stories, Take a 3-minute John Hyatt tune.
Yeah.
It's an epic. One of the best lyrics, in my opinion, is the opening lines to Tempted.
Squeeze.
Yes, yes. By the time you're halfway through that first verse, I bought a toothbrush, a toothpaste, a flannel for my face. I said to my reflection, let's get out of this place. You already have this visual of a guy who's, broken up with his significant other and is moving on to a new phase of his life. It's all laid out there, and it's a 3-minute movie.
Yeah.
And it's so, if the lyric is done well, it almost dictates the mix and the instrumentation and the story behind it, because you're filling in those blanks the same way you talk about with a film.
Sure, it tells a story. Just the first line, I bought a toothbrush.
Yeah.
That implies so much. Under what circumstances do people do that?
Right,
It's a
right.
change of life.
Right.
And that implies that they're at a threshold of something.
Yeah.
And then you have to go, okay, who is this character and what's led us to this moment?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
now where are we likely to go? And always the entrance of whether it's a play or a movie is a critical moment, because
Yeah.
we go, okay, who is this person and do I care, and how will I engage with them?
Right.
So that's exactly what I'm talking about. I will say that sometimes the singer or the songwriter may think they're telling one story and it turns out it's actually something else.
Oh, I think almost all the time.
Right?
Almost all
and
the
so
time.
they go, well, it's just a story about me breaking up, or this breakup I went through, or something like that. And you go, that's probably what you think. And we might not have to say to them, but we go, okay, it's actually, if anybody else is going to relate to it, they might go, oh, I'm sorry, your relationship broke up. But it speaks to larger themes of that everybody can relate to, of maturing, adjusting, changes, loss,
Life.
grief, hope,
Yeah.
life. And so sometimes either we can, just by constructing that on our own heads, even without telling them, that gives us the tools then to tell the story in a compelling way.
Yeah, yeah.
And again, this sounds super esoteric, but the way that I think about it is, let's say of just a basic question like, are we going to put reverb on this singer, and how much? And if you go, well, I don't know, I'm going to watch a bunch of videos on YouTube and do what they say. That's not the reason to make the decision, right? Or that's not even the method. What maybe it would be better to ask, who is this person and where are they relative to me?
Yeah.
Are they confrontationally in my face? Are they across the table? Are they across the yard? Are they on a huge concert stage proclaiming? Are they
on a hill far away?
Right. Are they on a
yeah.
hill far away? And who are they? Is it a wise mountain man sending signals? Is it somebody lost in the wilderness? And because I think that we live in metaphor, okay, that our reality is constructed of metaphor from our senses. If you can derive those metaphors, then you can and figure out what you're actually trying to say. Then when you're making all those basic decisions like what reverb and how much, if you know what the story is, or the story you've constructed in your head, or that you've conjured with the other people, then that tells you, okay, is it a concert hall? Is it a wooden room? Is it some space that doesn't exist in reality, that's all jagged or angular? Or is it there's no reverb because they're right here? Because even reverb, this is something else that I think about a lot, where I derive a lot of my thoughts about how recording works. It's just, I think, basic psychology, psychoacoustics, and evolution.
Absolutely.
Right? Because our hearing, even though we're lucky enough to live in a world where we don't just have to use our hearing to protect ourselves from danger.
Predators.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That is what it derived from, right? And the real reason we have hearing is so if we're sleeping and a twig cracks or there are footsteps, we're going to know that we're in danger.
Right. The lions are coming, get the hell out, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think that a certain amount of what we construct is actually acts on all those kind of primal reactions.
Well, and it's interesting, too, that each of us has a different perspective on that. So what you may hear is going to be completely different from what that artist may have intended.
Absolutely.
And I think that, to me, that's one of the things that I am grateful to be able to bring to a production as a producer, is the idea that I'm coming to this with not only fresh ears, but a different perspective than you would possibly have, because you've been living inside this. I'm going to bring something to it that you didn't necessarily anticipate.
Sure.
And hopefully between us, we collaborate on getting your vision out there.
Yeah. And there's always an invisible other entity in this equation, which is the listener.
Yeah.
Now, maybe we shouldn't be sitting in there going, well, what does this person want to hear? Or, I mean, I guess in some cases we might go, okay, here's our demographic. And and the average person right now wants to hear this, and they want to hear that kind of scenario.
Like that.
So do I.
Yeah.
But it is interesting to think, and maybe in some ways freeing to think that, we're going to put this message in a bottle out there. We're going to put this emotion, this thing that we believed in and felt, and it may arrive to someone else. But everyone that listens to it brings everything that they are and everything that they know to it, and it may resonate with them, and it may not. It's like the DNA molecules or whatever, the
and
proteins.
there's going to be so many variations,
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the things that I'm always fascinated with also. The experience that we have in the studio is going to be completely different from, when you play it for someone else. I had a wonderful conversation recently with a friend of mine, Michael Beinhorn. He put together a 2-inch 8-track machine for a session. And, one of the reasons for that was because Michael loves a really killer drum sound. And he said, you should have heard it. It was just amazing. It was just the drums from hell. It was awesome. And then we looked at each other and we realized no one else is ever going to hear this the way we are hearing it right now. And that's something that I think we do have to consider, is how are we going to take this experience that we're having in a room like this, in a temple of sound, and create something that translates to everything from some guy's home stereo to a set of earbuds and an MP3 and everything. And of course, the challenges now are greater than they ever have been, because there's so much more technology now and so many more variations. But we have to be conscious of that when we're creating this thing. How's it going to translate?
Yes, although luckily heartfelt emotion, or somebody that actually believes or is really experiencing what they're doing, seems to just transcend everything.
Absolutely.
Because I think about that and I think, in the 70s you'd sit between a pair of Advents and you could really hear stuff. You'd have some gigantic Koss headphones or whatever. But, you could still be moved by something coming out of a terrible transistor radio or coming out of a megaphone at a swimming pool.
True.
And it's the same now. I mean, there's a wide variety of crappy systems and crappy environments, and yet the soul of Ray Charles will reach through anything.
A great song is a great song.
A great song and a great performance that has, emotional authenticity. It just reaches through the wire, and so in some ways it doesn't matter. This is my transducer theory of recording. A lot of people think the recording starts at the microphone, right? And then it ends at the speaker. And we go through some transducers.
The technical process.
Exactly. But I think that's what people think, that's what recording is, right? It's putting up microphones, capturing it, manipulating it, being a master of space and time, and then getting it to somebody and it comes out a speaker. But, there are strings of transducers both before and after that.
Well, not just that, but I think that is essentially a link in the chain, because on one end you've got the artist and you've got the artistic creation. And then, as you say, on the other end, you've got the listener, or let's not even call it the listener, because, if we're talking about art, the patron, the person who is absorbing that art. When we talk about the artistic experience, really that's a lot of what, as educators, we endeavor to bring across, is that you, Mr. or Miss Student, are a conduit. You are a part of that creative process, and really it's so much more important than, as you say, setting up a microphone, twiddling faders, knobs, whatever. What's important here is to understand, to me, I think the equipment, absolutely. I love gear. We all love gear.
Yep.
That's why we're here. I walk into a room like this and I melt and I go, oh, wow, But I don't care if I've got this gear or if I've got a Porta Studio. I'm still ultimately doing the same thing. I'm in front of that artist and I'm saying, I'm going to help you bring this, I'm going to help you birth this baby. I'm going to help you bring this vision to fruition so that someone on the other side of that chain can hear it and experience it and be moved by it. And if I can do that, I don't care what gear I used, I'm successful, And we were talking earlier about our first recorders, I think, to this day, I can listen to some of the stuff I did on my first 3340, and I feel like, it sounds like shit, but I know what I had in my head, and I conveyed that. And I think that is really the lesson. It's not about the gear.
Yeah.
It's never been about the gear.
Yeah. Well, one of our primary mottos of our school is, it's not the wand, it's the wizard. So what I say, and all my students have heard this, but if you're in a restaurant and you have a fantastic meal and you say, could please send the chef, and the chef comes up and you, that was a delicious meal, why thank you. You say, I need to know the exact dimensions of the spoon that you use to stir the soup, as if the spoon made made a difference. But we tend to fixate on the tools, which is fine, and maybe it's a distraction, but I am in favor of being aware of what we are the conduit for.
Sure.
In Nashville we say it's about the song.
It has always been about the song, and that, it's funny because music now, a lot of times we bitch and whine about the fact that music has been commodified to a point where it's more and more difficult to make a living in the music industry now, because it really has been turned into an industry. At the same time, if I walk into a studio, the first thing I want to do is completely disabuse myself of, this is going to be a hit. I don't give a damn if I come out of here, with a recording that I am proud of, that the artist says to me, oh man, you nailed it, that's what's important. I don't care if it sells no copies whatsoever, and I'm sure you probably have this too. I have recordings that I've worked on that have never seen the light of day. I'm immensely proud of them. Some other stuff that I've worked on, that really I kind of thought was, not all that great, and maybe it sold really well, but I think it's about that experience more than anything else.
Yeah, I think I'm optimistic and starry-eyed enough to think that the public isn't as dumb as people say. That really, especially now where
you
they
are
can.
Optimistic. No.
But that now that people can listen to whatever they want to, and not just whatever the record companies decide are going to be the 40 songs that they can buy or hear on the radio. I think the average human being is on a wavelength to be communicated with by another human being, and that they can and every one of the senses that people have is to know when they're being hustled and when they're being lied to. And so I think if there's some sort of insincere music, if that's what they want, that's great. But I also think that it's more accessible now than ever for somebody to put their message out, without concern for whether it's going to appeal to the lowest common denominator. And they're going to be able to find the people that are the tuning forks that resonate with what they're doing. And it may be that it's 5 people.
Music, right?
Yeah. But there's, at this point, alternative to what? The mainstream. Exactly. There is no mainstream.
It's all alternative now,
which is great.
Yeah.
I mean, so what would you say? Would you rather have fewer alternatives or more alternatives, right?
Yeah.
And so my feeling is, yes, maybe it's a little bit less. I mean, we still have somebody who's a big blockbuster artist that makes a bunch of money and has endorsements and so forth, and many of them, at least now, have more control over their destiny than they did when they were, essentially being controlled by a corporation, right?
Yeah.
But maybe they've given up some of that control, but whatever. I mean, but as I say in my classes, if we're the 1970s or 80s, and you had 5 people in your town that liked your band, you're not going to make a living. You're not going to give up your day gig. If you're in the 2020s, and there are 5 people in every town that like your band and that are willing to spend some money on it, there are a lot of towns in the world.
Yeah.
And we're not talking about America. We're not talking about our neighborhood. We're talking about in the world. And there are people who are making a living, making whatever they want to do without anybody telling them what they have to do or how they need to wear their hair or anything else that we will never hear about. And we look at their YouTube and go, oh, isn't that sad? They only have 10,000 subscribers. If they have 10,000 rabid fans,
that's awesome.
Yeah. And those 10,000 rabid, not rabbit, fans, are willing to spend, what, $10 a year on their record? That would be $100,000.
Yeah.
If they're willing to spend $100 because they want a T-shirt and they want a Patreon and they want the special edition vinyl, that's $1 million.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think this is the best time there's ever been to make music.
It's an interesting perspective. What's funny about that, though, is that given your example, in the 70s or 80s, if you had maybe 5 people who loved your band, you still went out and played the gigs. You still dragged all your gear, and you kept doing it because you needed to.
Yeah.
And I think the same thing still holds true to this day. We create because there is a basic human need to create. Yeah. If we can, as you say, garner more of a following now because there's better communication in the world, fantastic, so be it. I love that, But at the same time, man, I don't care. I'm still going to do it. I'm still going to be working on music. I still work on music now. I don't have any illusions that I'm going to, put out a hit record.
You do it because you can't not do it.
Exactly.
And that's a good reason. Yeah, I mean, so I don't subscribe to the used to be so great and everything's terrible now mode. There is something that I think is unfortunate, which is just in the modern day, for performing musicians, there's less of a middle class or a middle range. And so it was nice in the 60s, 70s, 80s, where there was a kind of a ladder where you'd play in the high school band, you'd play at the prom, and you'd play at the VFW, and then you'd play at the coffee house, and you'd play at the little club, and then you'd play at the big club. And and you play the Holiday Inns. There was you could make a living with the band, just by playing 5 nights a week or whatever. And you could get good. And you could get good on being in front of people because you had the perfect test lab, which was a room full of people. You could see if they're bobbing their heads. You could see if they're throwing vegetables. You could see if they're leaving. And you can communicate with them in that way. And it's an interesting world where now we have people, and I don't think it's a bad thing, but it's a different thing, where people can be successful with music that they make in their bedroom. And I think that's great, but it makes you wonder then, what does the performance look like for them? And what happens when somebody sells a bunch of records but has never stood on a stage and actually has completely programmed music that they can't really perform other than hitting play and then singing or talking or rapping over it. So I worry a little bit about the sort of art of performance.
Well, not just the art of performance, but I think the other aspect of that is that there is, as we were talking earlier, an exchange of energy that happens between musicians. As a bass player, you have undoubtedly locked in with a drummer at some point and gone, oh my God. And it's this awesome exchange of energy. You literally are transported to another plane. You fall in love, in a sense, in a totally in a non-romantic way, but you really transcend. But there's a certain exchange there, a certain flow of energy, if I may be so cosmic about it.
Sure.
And I think that, when I started my class last semester, one of the things that I said was, okay, so who in here has played in a band? 2 people out of a class of 10 or 12. And I said, so what does everybody do musically? Well, I make beats, And I said, well, what is it about making beats that's going to make your beats any different from somebody else's beats? Because you're all using the same clips, basically. And what I made them do was sit down and do critical listening of various types of music. And part of that is the idea of listen to the exchange, listen to the push-pull, listen to the energy flowing between these players. Because if you're going to make beats, there ought to be a human aspect in there somewhere. There's got to be something that sets yours apart from the other. And I think part of that is that experience of that interchange between the humans.
Yeah. One reason that people do that is because that's what's accessible.
Yeah.
If you had a Sears guitar when we were kids, that was what was accessible. You could thrash out 3 chords and somebody would go, that's not music. And I think to a certain extent that's just what's available, and people get interested in it. It was interesting to see when we had Guitar Hero and Rock Band, a wave of guitar players. But everybody starts somewhere, and it's been very interesting to see with our students when we get people who basically done that, and with sometimes amazing results. But to see them then become acclimatized to recording musicians and bands and singers, I think it gives them an aesthetic, and maybe it means that the things are always just flowing, and the pendulum is always swinging. I mean, we're certainly seeing more live playing and more hybridization, and those are all the forces that create music. So I think it's just a fluid thing. And one of the beauties of the programming world is that you don't have to, in some ways that you don't have to deal with other humans, because you don't have to deal with the guitar player who quits, or the person who's unreliable, or the van breaking down, and
or whatever,
and all that sort of thing. So in some ways, when you're used to playing in a band, you think of it as a sort of a team sport, and the adventure of that is why we do it, and the stories we do it, and the camaraderie. But if you think of it as art, there's room for something that's a painting where, Caravaggio or somebody comes in and says, okay, you do the drapery and you do the sky, and then I'll do the face. And then there are other cases where maybe we don't want to co-make music. We have a vision, and now you can have complete control over it. And if you do, it's amazing that anyone, if they want strings, they don't have to be rich enough or borrow money from a record company to get a string section. They can have string sounds. They can do anything they want, and in a way, it just makes for a pure conduit from their creativity.
I think it also accelerates the creative process.
Absolutely.
The technology that we have now. I was listening the other day to Todd Rundgren's Something Anything, and even before Prince, this guy was an absolute fucking genius. To be able to hear this and envision this and be able to lay it down, and I think being able to do that is such a rarity, or was such a rarity in that era, because you didn't have the ability to sketch it out the way we do now with technology. And I think probably, I would imagine that we have a much larger percentage of self-produced artists now than we ever did back then, because it's easier to envision that final product. At the same time, I I am a huge proponent of the idea of that ebb and flow between musicians, and I think there's something about that. There's something about bringing in another musician, another artist, that will influence you in a way. I mean, even if you can play every instrument there is, you're going to bring in another artist because you want that perspective, you want that particular sound.
Yeah, and there's nothing stopping them from doing that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
It's just such a fascinating time now because it's so pluralistic and diverse. So, because there are people making beats or entire performances on their laptop or their phone, and that's fantastic. And there are people playing in old-time music bands with fiddles and banjos, and that's fantastic. And there are people who love rockabilly, and they have a rockabilly haircut and a rockabilly clothes and a rockabilly car and a rockabilly bass, and they go make rockabilly. Everything's happening all the time right now. And I think that's fantastic. And one of the things that the technology of this time has enabled is for people to get back to the way it was before Edison, which if you wanted to hear music, unless you were the king and could snap your fingers and have an orchestra troop in and play for you, if you wanted to make music, if you wanted to hear music, you had to make it. So after dinner, you'd gather around the fireplace.
The piano.
And now, because the tools are accessible, I'm hoping that instead of just sitting there passively consuming something, or whatever, actively consuming, but consuming what other people make, maybe people just go, hey, I'm just going to sit down and do my own thing. And that will be the pathway into doing it. And who knows, at some point they pick up an instrument or they connect with somebody in their school or their orchestra. And, one of the other arguments about all of this is, well, it's terrible because there's all this bad music being made, and when I was your age and blah, 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 and, I certainly...
We made bad music uphill in the snow.
That's
both
in the
ways.
snow both ways. We didn't have feet then, but I think that more music in the world can only be a good thing. And it doesn't matter if we think it's good or bad, if it's meaningful to the person that made it.
Absolutely.
And if they stick with it and they feel good about it, and who knows, we all made a lot of bad music that nobody could hear. You have to be
guilty
to get to the point of making good music.
Yeah.
And then people go, oh, but it's so terrible, there's no talent, no blah, blah, blah. And that's just silly because there's so much good music in the world now. And I have a theory for what in this current world of 55,000 songs being uploaded to Spotify a day or what have you, of what will make something stand out and succeed both commercially and artistically, and that's greatness.
Yeah.
And that's something that is as hard as it's ever been to achieve, technology or no technology. And at least there's a greater chance that somebody who is making music in their bedroom, like, let's talk about greatness, Jacob Collier.
Yeah, there you go.
Will be able to rise out of the above the din and be recognized and do what they do. So I think that this is a wonderful time.
Well, and I think what really is remarkable is that now we have the opportunity to meld those two aspects. We can take a rock band and add loops to punch up a chorus, just as a rather plebeian example, But there are so many things that we can do in terms of really taking the organic and mixing it with the technology in that sense. And what you end up with is, again, some kind of hybrid, bands that you would have never thought, genres would have mixed, putting hip hop together with heavy metal, who'd have thought, and yet some great artists, are doing just that. And I think the idea that, you take a tool, whether it's a guitar or whether it's a DAW, you take a tool and you put it in the hands of an artist. Every single artist is going to take that and use it differently to create something.
This is one of my great hopes for all of this, which is that technical perfection will be devalued. So if you listen to a record, my easy punching bag, or not punching bag, but my easy example would be a Steely Dan record. So if you listen to a Steely Dan record and you go, wow, that's incredible, it's so meticulous and perfect, and all the playing is amazing, all the sounds are amazing, everything about it is amazing. that was a hallmark of a great investment and getting, of technology and getting everything in the right place at the right time, which is a monument.
Yeah.
But at that time, nobody could really make anything that approached that or sounded like that at home. But now you can make something that's in time and in tune with a telephone. You can access something that sounds great and has no mistakes in it with almost any technology. And so to devalue technical perfection, which I think it was never about, and I think, of course, Steely Dan's a good way to stir up arguments among my colleagues. But because I love that music, but because of the subtleness and the groove and the slyness and the push and pull and the space and everything. So I think that if we can devalue the idea that, oh, this has no mistakes in it, or this sounds really good, what that puts a value on is the thing that there is no plug-in for, which is creativity and brilliance and emotion and the intelligence to approach something like a love song that's been done for thousands of years and find a different
create
angle.
Something unique.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is why we do this. We're doing this to create something new, something different, and maybe we'll succeed, maybe we won't. But God damn, if we're not going to enjoy ourselves trying, right?
Yeah. How could you not?
Yeah. So what, being an educator, and I would say that is a prime motivating force for you, clearly. Mm-hmm. What do you think is what's the one most important thing that you would tell your students?
Because I'm thinking of 1,000 important things, I'm just going to plagiarize John, because he always says to the students, attitude is 99% of the gig. And that's a good one. It's not original to me, obviously, but that they need to know many things, and everything that they learn will help them, whether it's about technology, microphones, signal flow, acoustics, all the things that we teach. But the most important thing is their demeanor and how much they care about what they're doing and how hard they're willing to work and how dedicated they are to what they do, and that they have a true love and a true fire and a true passion to do it, because you have to. It's the only way. And I think they understand that. And of course, we don't have to tell them that, because we have examples of that all around us at Blackbird Studio and in Nashville and in the world. And we get to talk to amazing people such as yourself. And they know. They already have it, or they wouldn't be here.
Well, that's what we hope. That is what we hope. And it's funny, as I was telling your students earlier, some people get involved in the creative process and realize, you know what, I'm more interested in creating the gear, or I'm more interested in whatever it is. There are so many aspects of this, but I think this understanding of just, as you said earlier, we're here for the art. We're here, everything, all this wonderful, beautiful gear that's surrounding us here, it's for one purpose and one purpose only, and that's to hopefully create something lasting.
Yeah. And I think the subtext to all of this is something that I harp on in class, which is, and I've talked about this a little bit here, which is not just doing things, but understanding and having a clear vision of why you're doing and what you're doing. And and that applies to, like I said, like a mix. You're sitting down, a mix is not just pushing faders, but what is the essence of the song? How are we trying to? But it's the same thing for an education, and that's why I start out talking about why are we really here? What are we really trying to do? As opposed to, I'm just going to dump a bunch of facts on you and make you regurgitate them on a test, right? And I think the same thing is true for them in crafting their lives and their careers, and by extension, the future of music making. They have to, this all sounds very Zen, but they have to really spend some time thinking and learning about themselves and looking into themselves and figuring out what is my passion? What motivates me? What am I driven to do? And I also point out, we're awfully lucky to be able to contemplate doing what we love to do for a living.
Oh, no kidding.
In the history of humans, where somebody's lot was to poke turnips with a stick in a field in Belgium, and that's what they did until they died. There are many people in the world now who it's not an option for them to say, I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that. So we have to realize how incredibly privileged it is to even contemplate doing that. But being in that position, and luckily, it means that there has to be some introspection.
Yeah, we have to grow as humans in order to be able to grow as artists.
That's correct.
It's all part of the human condition. That's beautiful. Mark Rubel, thank you for being my guest.
Thank you, Professor. Appreciate you.
Hey, I'm Daniel Keller. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join us each week for Insights in Sound.